The gunshot echoed across the Montana Territory plains as Colton Chase reined in his stallion, dust swirling around them like ghosts in the golden afternoon light of 1878. At first, he thought the crumpled figure by the burned-out homestead was just another victim of the frontier's harsh justice, until he saw her shoulders heaving with sobs that seemed to come from the depths of her broken heart. Dust and tears, the woman didn't look up when his horse's hooves crunched on the parched earth. Her once fine blue dress was torn and filthy, her hands bloodied from clawing at the ground. Colton dismounted carefully, keeping his movements slow as he approached. Years of ranging had taught him caution, especially around those who had nothing left to lose. "Madam," he called softly, touching the brim of his worn Stetson. "You hurt." When she raised her face, Colton felt something shift inside him. Despite the dirt and tear tracks mapping her cheeks, she was beautiful in the way that only true sorrow can reveal, raw and unguarded. Her chestnut hair had come loose from its pins, tangling around her shoulders like wild prairie grass. "They took my babies," she whispered, her voice cracking like parched earth in drought. "They rode in at dawn, took everything, my Oliver and Olivia, my babies." Her hands, red with dirt and her own blood where she'd torn her nails, clutched at his boots. "Please, they can't be far, please." Colton knelt beside her, his weathered face revealing nothing of the fury building inside him. "Who took them, madam?" "Men, 5 of them, said my husband owed a debt." Her voice strengthened slightly. "Richard's been dead 6 months, consumption took him. I told them, but they wouldn't listen. Said they'd bring the children back when I paid." Her fingers twisted in the fabric of her skirt. "I have nothing left to give them." Colton scanned the horizon, calculating distances, possibilities. The raiders couldn't have more than a few hours head start. His jaw tightened as he noted the direction of the hoofprints leading away from the devastated homestead. "What's your name?" he asked quietly. "Beatrice. Beatrice Ravenwood." Colton stood, extending his hand to help her up. "Mrs. Ravenwood, I need you to tell me everything you can about these men and your children. How old are they?" "Twins. 7 years old." Her voice broke again. "Oliver has a birthmark on his left cheek. Olivia wears a silver locket with her father's picture." He helped her to her feet, steadying her when she swayed. "Mrs. Ravenwood, I'm Colton Chase. I'll find your children." "How?" Her eyes, green as spring grass after rain, searched his face desperately. "You're just one man." Colton turned toward his horse, checking his Winchester rifle and the ammunition in his saddlebags. "One man's enough if he's the right man." He tightened his horse's cinch. "Are you hurt? Can you ride?" "I can ride," she said, straightening her shoulders with a dignity that impressed him. "Good. There's a settlement called Redemption about 10 miles east. Find Sheriff Blackwood. Tell him what happened." Colton paused, his eyes narrowing as he studied the tracks again. "Tell him Colton Chase is going after the Barlow gang." Her hand caught his arm. "You know these men, I know of them. Lowlifes who prey on homesteaders, especially widows and those down on their luck." His voice was flat, emotionless, but his eyes burned with a cold fury. "They're not expecting anyone to follow." "Let me come with you," she pleaded. "They're my children." Colton shook his head firmly. "Madam, where I'm going and what I'll be doing is no place for a lady. I ride faster alone." He softened his tone. "Your children need you alive and well when they return." Before she could protest further, he swung into the saddle. "I'll bring them back, Mrs. Ravenwood. You have my word." "I don't even know you," she whispered. Colton tipped his hat. "No, madam, you don't, but I give you my word all the same." He turned his horse, then paused. "Is there anything you can spare, something of yours or the children's? My horse can track by scent." Beatrice pulled a small cloth doll from her pocket, one arm partially torn. "Olivia's. She dropped it when they took her." Colton leaned down to take it, his fingers brushing hers. For a moment, something passed between them, a current of understanding, of shared purpose. "Be at Sheriff Blackwood's by nightfall," he said. "I'll bring them there." With that, he touched his spurs to his horse's flanks and rode out, the sun casting his shadow long and dark across the Montana plains. Behind him, Beatrice Ravenwood watched, one hand pressed to her throat, the other clutching the locket that matched her daughter's, the only thing she had left of her husband besides memories, and the 2 precious lives that Colton Chase had just ridden out to save. The dust from his departure had barely settled when Beatrice gathered what little strength she had left. She found her mare still hiding in what remained of the barn, frightened but unharmed. With trembling hands, she saddled the animal and mounted, turning east toward redemption as the stranger had instructed. As she rode, her mind raced with questions. Who was this Colton Chase? A bounty hunter, a lawman, or just another drifter passing through? Whatever he was, she had seen something in his eyes that gave her the first flicker of hope since the raiders had burst through her door at dawn. He would find her children. She believed him. She had to. The pursuit Colton rode hard, his eyes scanning the ground before him, following the clear trail left by 5 riders pushing their mounts at speed. They weren't bothering to hide their tracks, which told him they felt safe, unthreatened. That would change soon enough. He'd recognized the pattern of destruction at the Ravenwood homestead. The Barlow gang had been terrorizing the territory for months now, always staying one step ahead of the law. Led by Elias Barlow, they specialized in finding vulnerable homesteaders, intimidating them, stealing what little they had, and moving on before the law could catch up. But taking children, that was new, and it crossed a line that Colton couldn't abide. As the sun began its descent toward the western mountains, casting long shadows across the rolling prairie, Colton spotted a wisp of smoke on the horizon. He reined in, pulling his spyglass from his saddlebag. Through the lens, he could make out 5 horses and the flicker of a campfire in a small copse of trees beside a creek. Too confident by half, he thought. They weren't even posting a lookout. He dismounted, ground tying his horse in a shallow depression where it wouldn't be seen. Carefully, he checked his Colt revolver, making sure all 6 chambers were loaded. The Winchester rifle came next, the familiar weight of it reassuring in his hands. He wasn't a violent man by nature, but 15 years on the frontier had taught him that sometimes violence was the only language certain men understood. Moving silently, keeping to the shadows as twilight deepened, Colton circled the camp. From his vantage point behind a boulder, he could see all 5 men clearly now. Elias Barlow was unmistakable with his shock of white blonde hair and the scar that pulled his left eye into a permanent squint. His younger brother Micah sat beside him, cleaning his fingernails with a knife. The other 3 Colton recognized Pete Duggan and the Chalmers twins were playing cards, passing a bottle between them. And there, tied to a tree at the edge of the firelight, were 2 small figures. The boy was sitting upright, his arm protectively around his sister, who appeared to be asleep, her head on his shoulder. Even from this distance, Colton could see the small dark mark on the boy's cheek. Oliver Ravenwood, keeping watch over his sister just as their mother had described. Colton's jaw tightened. The children looked unharmed, but he could see the fear in the boy's posture, the way he tensed whenever one of the men moved. These men had terrorized 2 innocent children, torn them from their mother, and for what? Money that didn't exist. Revenge against a dead man. He considered his options. 5 against 1 weren't odds he liked, especially with the children in the middle. He could wait until the men were asleep, try to free the children quietly, but if anything went wrong, the kids would be in the line of fire. No, he decided. This needed to end now, before these men could hurt anyone else. Reaching into his pocket, he pulled out Olivia's doll. He'd bring it back to her soon, along with her brother, back to their mother who waited with eyes that haunted him even now. Eyes that had looked at him like he was their last hope in the world. Taking a deep breath, Colton stepped out from behind the boulder, his rifle trained on the center of the camp. "Barlow," he called, his voice carrying easily in the evening stillness. "I've come for the Ravenwood children." The reaction was immediate. All 5 men leapt to their feet, hands dropping to their holsters, but none of them drew. They weren't fools enough to draw against a man who already had a rifle aimed and ready. Elias Barlow squinted into the gathering darkness. "Who the hell are you?" "Name's Chase." "Colton Chase. Those children don't belong to you. They're going home to their mother." Barlow laughed, a harsh sound that echoed across the small clearing. "Chase, I've heard of you. Used to ride with the Montana regulators, didn't you, before you got soft?" Colton didn't take the bait. "The children, Barlow. Now, or what? You'll shoot all 5 of us. Even you ain't that good." Barlow took a step forward, his hand still hovering near his gun. Besides, we've got a business arrangement with the widow Ravenwood. She owes money. Her husband's been dead 6 months. Whatever debt you think she owes died with him. That ain't how we see it. Barlow's smile revealed tobacco-stained teeth. But we're reasonable men. Tell the widow she can have her brats back for $500. She doesn't have it. Then I guess these little ones are gonna learn a new trade. Barlow glanced at the children. Boy looks strong enough to work the mines down south. Girl might fetch a good price in certain establishments once she's a bit older. Colton's finger tightened on the trigger, but he kept his voice steady. You're not taking those children anywhere. And you're not taking them from us, Micah Barlow interjected, his hand now resting openly on his holstered pistol. Not alone. He's not alone. The new voice came from the darkness to Colton's right. All eyes turned to see Sheriff Blackwood step into the firelight, his star gleaming on his chest, his shotgun leveled at the Barlow brothers. From the left came another voice. Drop your weapons, gentlemen. You're surrounded. 3 more figures emerged from the shadows: Deputy Marshal Wilson and 2 of his men, all armed and ready. Colton didn't take his eyes off Elias Barlow, but he allowed himself a small smile. Seems the odds just changed, wouldn't you say? For a long moment, no one moved. Then Elias Barlow slowly raised his hands. This ain't over, Chase. For tonight it is, Sheriff Blackwood said firmly. Guns on the ground, nice and easy. One by one, the Barlow gang disarmed. As Deputy Wilson and his men moved in to bind their hands, Colton made his way to the children. Oliver looked up at him with eyes far too old for a 7-year-old. Are you taking us to Mama? Colton knelt, slipping Olivia's doll into the boy's hand. Yes, son, your mama sent me to find you. She's waiting. The boy's face crumpled then, the brave facade finally breaking. They said she didn't want us anymore, that she sold us to pay Papa's debts. They lied, Colton said gently, working at the ropes that bound the children to the tree. Your mama loves you more than anything in this world. She's the one who told me how to find you. As the ropes fell away, Olivia stirred, her eyes fluttering open. Oliver, it's all right, Liv, her brother assured her. This man is taking us to Mama. Colton lifted the little girl, her small arms automatically wrapping around his neck as she buried her face against his shoulder. With his free hand, he helped Oliver to his feet. Sheriff Blackwood approached, his weathered face softening at the sight of the children. Widow Ravenwood arrived in town about an hour ago, half dead from worry. When she told me what happened, I gathered the men and rode out. Figured you might need some help. I appreciate it, Colton said sincerely. The children appear unharmed, but they need their mother. And a doctor, just to be sure, Blackwood agreed. He looked at the boy. You're a brave young man, Oliver. Your mama's mighty proud of you, I'd wager. Oliver straightened his small shoulders. I had to take care of Olivia. Papa always said I'm the man of the house now. And you did just that, Colton assured him, feeling a swell of admiration for the child's courage. Now let's get you both home. As they walked back to the horses, Oliver's small hand slipped into Colton's. Mister, who are you? Colton looked down at the boy, then at the sleeping girl in his arms. Just a friend, son, just a friend. But as they rode toward redemption under a canopy of stars, Colton found himself thinking of Beatrice Ravenwood's green eyes and the way they had looked at him not just with desperation and hope, but with something that had reached inside him and touched a place he'd thought long since closed off. And for the first time in years, Colton Chase wondered if perhaps he was ready to be more than just a friend to someone, more than just a lone rider passing through, more than just a name whispered in stories around campfires. Perhaps he was ready to be a man with roots again, a man with a home. Reunion, the town of Redemption, looked like 100 other frontier settlements that Colton had passed through over the years, a single dusty main street lined with false-fronted buildings, a church with a small steeple, a livery stable, and the inevitable saloon. But as they rode in, the children secure in his arms, Colton found himself seeing it differently. Lamplight glowed in windows, casting warm rectangles onto the street. From somewhere came the sound of a piano being played, not the usual saloon tune, but something softer, more melodic. Sheriff Blackwood led them to his office, a solid brick building that also served as the town's jail. Widow Ravenwood's inside, he said quietly. Doc Jenkins checked her over. She's exhausted, but no lasting harm done. Colton dismounted carefully, still holding Olivia, who had fallen back asleep during the ride. Oliver slid down after him, his small face tight with fatigue and anticipation. "You ready to see your mama?" Colton asked the boy. Oliver nodded solemnly, reaching up to take his sister's hand where it dangled from Colton's embrace. The three of them walked toward the door, connected by touch and something deeper that Colton couldn't quite name. Before they reached the steps, the door flew open. Beatrice Ravenwood stood framed in the doorway, her figure silhouetted by the lamp burning behind her. For a moment she was perfectly still, as if afraid to believe what she was seeing. "Mama," Oliver's voice broke the spell. He released his grip on his sister's hand and ran forward. Beatrice fell to her knees, gathering her son into her arms with a cry that was half sob, half laughter. "Oliver, oh my darling boy," over her son's shoulder, her eyes met Colton's. The naked gratitude and joy in her gaze hit him like a physical force. He approached slowly, Olivia still sleeping against his chest. "She's unharmed," he said softly as Beatrice reached for her daughter. "Just tired, they both are." As he transferred the sleeping child to her mother's arms, their hands touched. Despite everything, the danger, the exhaustion, the emotional turmoil of the day, Colton felt that touch like a brand upon his skin. "Thank you," Beatrice whispered, tears streaming freely down her face as she held both her children close. "How can I ever repay you?" "No need, madam," Colton replied, suddenly aware of his dusty clothes and unshaven face. He stepped back, touching the brim of his hat. "Just doing what needed doing." Sheriff Blackwood appeared beside them. "Mrs. Ravenwood, why don't you take the children inside? There's a room in the back with a cot where they can rest while we sort things out." Beatrice nodded, reluctantly releasing Oliver so she could stand. The boy immediately took her hand, pressing close to her side as if afraid she might disappear. Will you be staying, Mr. Chase?" she asked, her eyes meeting his again. Before Colton could answer, Sheriff Blackwood interjected. "Chase, I need your statement about what happened out there. The judge will want to hear from you when he comes through next week." Colton hesitated, caught between his instinct to move on and something new pulling him to stay. "I suppose I could stay a few days." Something flickered in Beatrice's eyes, relief perhaps, or hope. "The hotel has rooms, I'm sure," or, she paused, seeming to gather her courage. "We have nothing to go back to at the homestead, not now, but I have a small inheritance from my aunt in the bank here, enough to rent the miller's old place at the edge of town for a while. There's a barn, if you needed somewhere for your horse." It was an offer made from gratitude, Colton knew. Nothing more, and yet, "That's kind of you, Mrs. Ravenwood. Let's see how things stand in the morning." She nodded, a small smile touching her lips. "In the morning, then." As she turned to go inside with her children, Oliver looked back at Colton. "You'll come say goodbye before you leave, won't you, mister?" Colton felt something tug inside his chest. "I promise, son." Sheriff Blackwood clapped a hand on Colton's shoulder as the door closed behind the Ravenwoods. "Damn fine thing you did today, Chase." Not many men would have ridden out like that, not against the Barlow gang. Colton shrugged, uncomfortable with the praise. "Couldn't just leave those kids." "No, I suppose you couldn't." The sheriff gave him a shrewd look. "You know, this town could use a man like you. Marshal Wilson's been looking for a deputy with some backbone." "I don't wear a badge anymore," Colton said automatically, "so I've heard." Blackwood didn't press the issue. "Come on, let's get your statement down while it's fresh. Then you look like you could use a drink and about 3 days' sleep." Later, after giving his account of the confrontation with the Barlow gang, Colton found himself at the bar of the Silvertip Saloon, nursing a whiskey and thinking about green eyes and a brave little boy who had protected his sister even while tied to a tree. He'd meant what he said to the sheriff. He didn't wear a badge anymore, hadn't since the incident 5 years ago that had left 3 men dead, and Colton with a bullet wound in his shoulder that still ached when the weather changed. He'd walked away from that life, choosing instead to drift, taking odd jobs as a scout, occasionally hunting bounties when the reward was high enough and the target deserving enough. It wasn't much of a life, but it was simple, uncomplicated. A woman's face flashed in his memory, not Beatrice Ravenwood's, but another woman from years ago, Caroline. His fiancée, once upon a time, before she decided that loving a lawman meant too many nights alone, too many days of worry. She'd married the banker's son instead, a safe choice. A smart choice. Colton couldn't blame her. He'd seen what happened to lawmen's wives, the fear they lived with, the grief many of them eventually faced. It was no life for a woman, especially not one as gentle and refined as Beatrice Ravenwood seemed to be, and yet. The way she had straightened her shoulders when he'd asked if she could ride. The fierce love in her eyes when she'd held her children. The courage it must have taken to leave everything behind and start over in a strange town with 2 young children after her husband died. Beatrice Ravenwood was no delicate flower. She was a survivor. Colton drained his glass and stood. Tomorrow he would check on the Ravenwoods, make sure they were settled, and then move on. That was the sensible thing to do, the right thing, so why did it suddenly feel like running away? A new beginning morning brought clarity and purpose to Beatrice Ravenwood. After a night spent holding her children close, listening to their soft breathing and thanking God for their safe return, she was ready to face whatever came next. The banker, Mr. Hollister, had been sympathetic to her situation and had arranged for her to rent the small house at the edge of town that had been vacant since the Millers left for Oregon the previous spring. "It's not much," he had warned her. "Just 2 rooms and a lean-to kitchen. Needs some work." "It has a roof and 4 walls," Beatrice had replied. "After what we've been through, that's palace enough." Now, as she stood in the dusty main room of the little house, Olivia and Oliver exploring every corner with the resilience only children possess, Beatrice felt a weight lift from her shoulders. They were safe. They were together. Everything else they could rebuild. A knock at the open door drew her attention. Colton Chase stood there, hat in hand, looking surprisingly well-groomed. He'd shaved, she noticed, revealing a strong jawline previously hidden by trail dust and stubble. His dark hair, though still too long by Eastern standards, had been neatly combed. "Mr. Chase," she greeted him, suddenly aware of her own disheveled appearance. She hadn't had a proper bath in days, and her dress, though clean thanks to the kindness of the sheriff's wife, was wrinkled and worn. "Please come in." He stepped inside, his tall frame seeming to fill the small space. "Just wanted to check that you and the children were settling in all right." "We are, thank you." She gestured around the bare room. "It's not much, but it's a start." "Mama, look." Olivia called from the corner where she and Oliver had discovered a small shelf built into the wall. "We can put our books here." Beatrice smiled at her daughter's enthusiasm. "Yes, darling, as soon as we get our things from the homestead." Colton cleared his throat. "About that, Sheriff Blackwood and I were talking. He's sending a wagon out today to see what can be salvaged." "I offered to go along." "That's very kind, but you've done so much already," Beatrice protested. "It's no trouble," he insisted. "I know what to look for, and this way you can stay with the children. They've had enough separation for a while, I'd imagine." The truth of his words touched her. How had this stranger so quickly come to understand what she and her children needed? "Thank you," she said simply. "There's not much worth saving, I'm afraid. The furniture was simple, but there's a trunk in what was our bedroom at his keepsakes, letters from Richard, the children's baby clothes. And Richard's books. He was a great reader." "I'll find it," Colton promised. Oliver appeared at Colton's side, looking up at the tall man with undisguised admiration. "Are you staying in redemption, Mr. Chase?" Colton glanced at Beatrice, then back at the boy. "For a little while at least. I promised the sheriff I'd testify when the judge comes through. Will those bad men go to jail?" Oliver's voice was small but determined. Colton knelt to the boy's level. "Yes, son, they will, for a long time. They won't hurt anyone else." "Good." Oliver nodded decisively. "Because they made Olivia cry, and Papa always said gentlemen don't make ladies cry." "Your papa was right about that," Colton agreed, his voice gentle. "He sounds like he was a wise man." "He was the best papa," Oliver declared. Then, with the directness of childhood, he added, "But he's in heaven now, and Mama says sometimes God takes people to heaven because he needs them there more than we need them here." Beatrice felt tears prick her eyes. "Oliver, Mr. Chase doesn't need to hear all this." But Colton didn't seem bothered. "That's a good way to think about it," he told the boy. "And your mama's right, but you know what else? I bet your papa is mighty proud of how brave you were taking care of your sister like that." Oliver's chest puffed out slightly. I promised I would. And you kept that promise. Colton straightened, ruffling the boy's hair. That's what makes a man, Oliver, keeping his promises. The simple wisdom of his words struck Beatrice deeply. Richard had been a good man, a loving husband, but the consumption that took him had been long and slow, draining their resources as surely as it drained his life. He had promised to take care of her and the children always, but in the end, it was a promise he couldn't keep, no matter how much he had wanted to. I should go, Colton said, breaking into her thoughts. The wagon's leaving soon. Is there anything specific you want me to look for besides the trunk? Beatrice considered. There's a quilt on my bed, my mother made it, and the children's clothes, of course, whatever you can find. She hesitated, then added, there's a small Derringer pistol in the drawer beside the bed. Richard insisted I have it, though I never learned to use it properly. Colton nodded. I'll find it. As he turned to leave, Beatrice impulsively reached out to touch his arm. Mr. Chase, Colton, thank you not just for this, but for everything. For believing me yesterday when I said they took my children, for riding out after them without hesitation, for bringing them back to me. His eyes, blue as a summer sky, met hers. You don't need to thank me for doing what any decent man would do. But that's just it, she said softly. I'm not sure any man would have done what you did. Ridden out alone against 5 armed men for the children of a woman you'd never met before. Something flickered in his expression, something Beatrice couldn't quite read. Maybe I just have a soft spot for families, he said finally. Or maybe I don't like bullies who prey on women and children. Before she could respond, he touched the brim of an imaginary hat, his actual hat still in his hands, and stepped back. I'll be back before sundown with whatever I can salvage. And then he was gone, leaving Beatrice staring after him, wondering about the man who had ridden into their lives like an avenging angel and who would, she suspected, ride out again just as suddenly. Men like Colton Chase didn't stay in one place for long. She knew that, had accepted it. So why did the thought of his inevitable departure leave her feeling hollow inside? Salvage, the homestead, looked even worse in the clear light of day than it had when Colton had first ridden up to find Beatrice Ravenwood on her knees in the dust. The main house was still standing, but the windows had been smashed, the door torn from its hinges. The barn's roof had partially collapsed, though whether from the raiders' violence or simple neglect, Colton couldn't tell. Sheriff Blackwood let out a low whistle as he pulled the wagon to a halt. Damn Barlow's did a number on this place. Colton nodded grimly, dismounting and tying his horse to the wagon. Let's see what we can salvage. Inside, the house told the story of a hasty, violent invasion. Furniture was overturned, dishes smashed. Someone had taken an axe to the small piano that stood in one corner, its strings hanging like the entrails of a gutted animal. Savages, Blackwood muttered, kicking aside the shards of a broken lamp. What kind of men do this to a widow's home? The kind we locked up yesterday, Colton replied, already moving toward what he assumed was the bedroom door. You check for anything useful in the main room. I'll look in here. The bedroom had fared slightly better than the main room. The bed frame was intact, though the mattress had been slashed open, feathers scattered across the floor like snow. The trunk Beatrice had mentioned stood at the foot of the bed, its lock broken but the contents apparently untouched. Colton knelt beside it, carefully lifting the lid. Inside, neatly folded, were the mementos of a life. A small pair of baby shoes, yellowed letters tied with faded ribbon, a man's pocket watch. Beneath these were books Shakespeare, Dickens, a well-worn Bible. At the very bottom, wrapped in oilcloth, was the quilt Beatrice had mentioned. He repacked everything carefully, closing the lid and securing it with a length of rope from his saddlebags. The Derringer was still in the bedside drawer, as she had said. He checked it loaded, but with a sticky action that would make it more dangerous to its user than to any target. He'd clean it for her before returning it. In what was clearly the children's room, Colton found a few items of clothing that had been overlooked in the raiders' rampage. A small wooden horse that had somehow escaped destruction. A girl's rag doll, not unlike the one he had returned to Olivia, but newer. By the time they had gone through the entire house, the wagon was half full with the salvaged remnants of the Ravenwood's life. Not much to show for years of hard work and dreams, Colton thought grimly. Might as well check the barn before we head back, Sheriff Blackwood suggested. Never know what might be useful. The barn's interior was dim, dust motes dancing in the shafts of sunlight that penetrated the damaged roof. Most of the stalls were empty, the livestock presumably stolen by the Barlow gang. But in the last stall, half hidden under a fallen beam, Colton spotted movement. Cautiously, he approached, his hand on his revolver. A soft, whickering sound reached his ears. Pushing aside the beam, he found himself looking at a small, trembling foal, no more than a few months old. "Well, I'll be," Sheriff Blackwood said from behind him. "Looks like the Barlows missed one." The foal was a palomino, its coat golden in the dim light, its legs spindly but unharmed. It backed away as Colton reached for it, eyes rolling in fear. "Easy, little one," Colton soothed, keeping his voice low and gentle. "Nobody's going to hurt you." After several minutes of patient coaxing, the foal allowed Colton to slip a makeshift halter over its head. "Must have hidden when the raiders came through," he observed. "Lucky little fellow." "What are you going to do with it?" Blackwood asked. "Not like the widow can feed a horse right now." Colton stroked the foal's neck, feeling the rapid pulse beneath his fingers gradually slow. "I'll figure something out. Can't just leave it here to starve." By the time they had loaded the last of the salvageable items and secured the foal in the back of the wagon with some hay they'd found in the loft, the sun was low on the horizon. Colton took one last look at the homestead as they prepared to leave. It had been a good piece of land once. The soil was rich. The creek that ran along the eastern boundary provided water year-round. With enough work and a bit of luck, it could be again. "Shame about this place," Blackwood commented, following Colton's gaze. "Ravenwood worked himself to death getting it established, had big plans, irrigation system, orchards, the whole works. What will happen to it now?" the sheriff shrugged. "Bank will probably take it for unpaid loans. Or it might revert to the territory if there are no debts against it." "Why? You interested?" Colton didn't answer immediately. Was he interested? The thought hadn't crossed his mind until Blackwood mentioned it. He'd never stayed in one place long enough to consider putting down roots, building something permanent. "Just curious," he said finally, swinging up onto his horse. "Let's get back. Mrs. Ravenwood will be wondering what happened to us." As they rode, Colton found his thoughts returning to the widow and her children. They had so little now, but Beatrice had faced her situation with a dignity and courage that impressed him deeply. No tears, no collapse into self-pity, just a determination to rebuild, to provide for her children. It was rare to find such strength in this harsh land. Rarer still to find it combined with the gentle beauty Beatrice possessed. She wasn't like the hard-faced women who often survived on the frontier, their softness scoured away by wind and hardship. Somehow she had maintained her grace, her kindness. The foal whickered from the back of the wagon, pulling Colton from his thoughts. He glanced back to check on the animal, reminded suddenly of Oliver and Olivia's delight in small things. They would love the foal, he knew. A bright spot in the darkness of recent days. Maybe that was reason enough to consider staying a little longer than he'd planned. Just until the judge came through. Just until the Ravenwoods were properly settled. Just until he was certain that the hollow feeling in his chest at the thought of riding away from those green eyes was nothing more than passing fancy. Unexpected gifts, Olivia spotted them first, her sharp eyes catching the movement on the road leading into town. "Mama, someone's coming." "Is it Mr. Chase?" Beatrice moved to the window, shading her eyes against the setting sun. "Yes, darling, it looks like Mr. Chase and Sheriff Blackwood. Did they bring our things?" Oliver asked, pressing his face to the glass beside her. "We'll see soon enough," Beatrice replied, trying to temper her children's expectations. She had little hope that much had survived the raiders' destruction. "Why don't you both wash your hands? It's nearly supper time." As the children scampered to the basin in the corner, Beatrice smoothed her hair and straightened her apron. It was foolish, she knew, to care about her appearance at a time like this, but something about Colton Chase made her conscious of herself in a way she hadn't been since, before Richard fell ill. The wagon pulled up outside just as she was setting a pot of stew over the fire. There was a knock at the door, and then Colton was there, his tall frame filling the doorway, his face dusty from the road but his eyes bright as they found hers. "Mrs. Ravenwood," he greeted her, removing his hat. "We found some things that might be of use to you." "Please come in," she invited, standing aside. "And after all we've been through, I think you might call me Beatrice." A smile touched his lips. "Beatrice, then." Sheriff Blackwood appeared behind him. "Evening, madam. Got quite a haul for you, considering the state of the place." The next hour was spent bringing in the salvaged items. The trunk from the bedroom brought tears to Beatrice's eyes when she opened it to find Richard's books and her mother's quilt intact. The children's faces lit up at the sight of their few recovered toys and clothes. "Is that everything?" Beatrice asked as Colton brought in the last box. "Not quite," he replied, an odd light in his eyes. "There's one more thing, but it's outside. Children, would you like to see?" Oliver and Olivia looked to their mother for permission. At her nod, they followed Colton out the door, Beatrice close behind. The foal stood tethered to the hitching post, its golden coat catching the last rays of the setting sun. For a moment, no one spoke. Then Olivia let out a delighted squeal. "A pony. Mama, look, a real pony." "We found it in the barn," Colton explained as the children approached the animal with cautious excitement. "It must have hidden when the raiders came. It's young but healthy." Beatrice shook her head. "Mr. Chase, Colton, I can't possibly accept this. We have nowhere to keep it, no means to feed it." "Already taken care of," Sheriff Blackwood interjected. "Mrs. Miller's place has that small corral out back, and I spoke to Tom Wilson at the livery. He'll provide feed at a fair price, in exchange for Oliver helping out with chores when he's old enough. And I'll show the boy how to care for it properly," Colton added. "It's good for children to have something to care for. Teaches responsibility." Beatrice looked from the men to her children, who were already stroking the foal's soft nose with expressions of wonder. It was a generous gift, far more so than they realized. Not just the animal itself, but the normality it represented. A chance for her children to be children again, not just survivors of tragedy. "Thank you," she said softly. "Both of you, for everything." Sheriff Blackwood tipped his hat. "Least we could do, madam. Now I'd best be getting back to town. The wife will be wondering where I've got to." As he drove the wagon away, Beatrice and Colton stood side by side, watching the children with their new friend. "What will you name it?" Colton asked the twins. Oliver and Olivia exchanged a look, one of those silent communications that only twins seem capable of. "Sunny," Olivia declared, "because his coat is like sunshine. And because today is a sunny day, even though there aren't any real sunny days yet," Oliver added seriously. "Mama says sometimes you have to find the sunshine even when it's cloudy." Beatrice felt Colton's gaze on her. "Your mama is a wise woman," he said. Later, after the children had reluctantly said goodnight to Sunny and been tucked into the small bed they shared in the house's second room, Beatrice found herself alone with Colton. He had built up the fire and now sat across from her, cleaning the derringer he'd recovered from the homestead. "It's a good weapon for a lady," he told her, his hands moving with practiced efficiency over the small pistol. "But only if it's clean and you know how to use it." "Richard insisted I have it, but I was always afraid of it," she admitted. "It seems so final." Colton's hands stilled. "Out here, sometimes final is what keeps you alive." He considered her for a moment. "I could teach you how to use it safely, how to protect yourself and the children if need be." The offer was practical, sensible. But Beatrice heard something else beneath it, the suggestion that she might need such knowledge, because he wouldn't always be there to protect them. Of course he wouldn't, she reminded herself. Colton Chase was a drifter, a man who moved with the wind. He had no reason to stay in redemption once the Barlow gang was sentenced. No reason to concern himself with a widow and her children beyond the help he'd already given. "I would appreciate that," she said finally. "The children and I are alone now. I need to be able to stand on my own." Something flickered in his eyes, approval, perhaps, or admiration. "You're already standing, Beatrice. Most women would have collapsed under what you've endured." She shook her head. "I don't have that luxury. Oliver and Olivia need me to be strong. And you are." He reassembled the derringer with quick, sure movements, then slid it across the table to her. "But being strong doesn't mean doing everything alone. Everyone needs help sometimes. Even you." The question slipped out before she could stop it. Colton's lips curved in a small smile. Even me. Though I'm not always good at admitting it. The fire crackled in the hearth, filling the comfortable silence that followed. Beatrice found herself studying him openly now, the strong line of his jaw, the tiny scar at the corner of his right eye, the way his dark hair curled slightly at the nape of his neck. "Will you stay in redemption?" she asked finally. "After the judge comes, I mean." Colton leaned back in his chair, his expression thoughtful. "I hadn't planned to. I don't usually stay anywhere long." "Why not?" The question was bold, perhaps too personal, but Beatrice found she genuinely wanted to know. He considered her for a long moment before answering. "I was a marshal once, had a badge, a purpose, but I lost 3 good men in a shootout that should never have happened. After that, it seemed easier to keep moving, no attachments, no responsibilities beyond myself. And no chance of losing anyone else," Beatrice observed softly. His eyes met hers, surprised and then appreciative of her insight. "Something like that. I understand the temptation," she said. "After Richard died, part of me wanted to close off my heart, stop caring so deeply, it hurts less that way." She glanced toward the children's room. "But then I look at them, and I know I can't. To stop feeling the pain would mean stopping feeling the joy too." Colton was silent for a long time, his eyes never leaving her face. Finally, he said, "You're an unusual woman, Beatrice Ravenwood." "Am I?" "Yes." He stood, reaching for his hat. "Most people out here learn to harden themselves. It's easier to survive that way." "Perhaps." She rose as well, walking him to the door. "But is surviving enough? Don't we all deserve more than just existence?" At the doorway, he paused, turning to face her. For a breathless moment, Beatrice thought he might touch her hand, her cheek, her hair. She found herself wanting him to, and the realization shocked her. Instead, he simply said, "I'll come by tomorrow. Start teaching you to use that derringer." "I'd like that," she replied, her voice steadier than she felt after he left. Beatrice stood for a long time at the window, watching his figure disappear into the gathering darkness. She'd been a wife, then a widow, then a victim. Now she was a survivor trying to rebuild. But tonight, for the first time since Richard's death, she had felt something else stirring within her. Something she had thought was buried with her husband, hope, not just for survival but for happiness, for a future that held more than just getting by. And it frightened her almost as much as it thrilled her. Lessons true to his word, Colton arrived the next morning as Beatrice was hanging laundry in the small yard behind the house. Oliver and Olivia were already in the corral with Sonny, carefully brushing the foal's coat as they had been shown. "They're naturals with him," Colton observed, leaning against the fence beside her. Beatrice smiled, watching her children. "They've always loved animals. Richard promised them a dog once, but then he got sick." "Every child should have a dog," Colton said, "or a horse, something to care for, something that loves them unconditionally." She glanced at him, curious about the man behind these unexpected insights. "Did you have a dog when you were a boy?" A shadow crossed his face, there and gone so quickly she might have imagined it. "For a while, old hound named Blue followed me everywhere." There was more to that story, Beatrice sensed, but she didn't press. Everyone had parts of themselves they kept hidden, wounds too tender to expose to the light. "I brought something for you," Colton said, changing the subject. He handed her a small bundle wrapped in cloth. "For your shooting lesson." Unwrapping it, Beatrice found several paper targets and a box of ammunition for the derringer. "You're serious about teaching me?" "Very." His expression was solemn. "I want you to be able to protect yourself and the children, Beatrice. The Barlow gang may be locked up, but there are others like them out there." She nodded, accepting both his gift and the gravity of his concern. "Where should we begin?" "First, with understanding the weapon itself." He led her to a fallen log at the edge of the property, away from the children, but still within sight of them. Sitting beside her, he took the derringer from his pocket where he'd stored it after cleaning it the night before. "This is a Remington double-barrel derringer," he explained, his voice taking on a patient, instructional tone. "It's small, easy to conceal, but only effective at close range. It holds 2 shots and then you have to reload." For the next hour, he taught her the basics: how to load it, how to hold it, how to aim. His hands were gentle as they corrected her grip, his voice steady as he explained the principles of shooting. The most important thing, he emphasized, is to never point it at anything you don't intend to shoot, and never shoot unless you're prepared to kill. Beatrice swallowed hard at the starkness of his words. I don't know if I could actually shoot a person. You could if it meant protecting your children, Colton said with certainty. A mother's instinct to protect her young is one of the strongest forces in nature. When it came time for her to actually fire the weapon, Colton set up a target on a tree stump about 10 yards away. Remember what I showed you, he instructed, standing close behind her. Breathe in, aim, breathe out, and squeeze the trigger gently. Don't pull it. Beatrice raised the derringer, trying to steady her hand. Colton's larger hand came up to support her wrist. Like this, he murmured, his breath warm against her ear. She was acutely aware of his proximity, of the solid strength of him just inches away. Focus, she told herself sternly. This isn't about him. This is about learning to protect your children. The derringer's report was sharp in the morning air. The bullet missed the target entirely, disappearing into the brush beyond. That's all right, Colton encouraged her. Nobody hits the target their first time. Try again. By the third shot, Beatrice had at least managed to hit the tree stump. By the 10th, she was hitting the outer rings of the target more often than not, and by the 20th, she had placed 2 shots near the center. Good, Colton said, genuine approval in his voice. Very good, you're a natural. Hardly, Beatrice laughed, lowering the weapon. Her arm ached from the effort of holding it steady for so long. But I think I understand it better now. It's not as frightening when you know how it works. Most things are like that, Colton observed, taking the derringer to reload it. Fear comes from not understanding, from feeling powerless. They worked for another hour, until Beatrice could consistently hit the target. By then, Oliver and Olivia had grown bored with grooming Sonny and had come to watch, wide-eyed, as their mother transformed into someone new before their eyes, a woman who could handle a weapon, who could protect them. Can I try, Mama? Oliver asked hopefully. Not today, son, Colton answered before Beatrice could. A gun isn't a toy, but when you're older, if your mama agrees, I'll teach you how to use one properly. The casual promise when you're older hung in the air between them, implying a future where Colton Chase was still part of their lives. Beatrice felt her heart quicken at the thought, even as she reminded herself not to read too much into a simple turn of phrase. As they walked back to the house, Olivia slipped her small hand into Colton's larger one. Mr. Chase, will you stay for lunch? Mama made cornbread yesterday and it's really good. Colton glanced at Beatrice, a question in his eyes. I wouldn't want to impose. It's no imposition, she assured him, touched by her daughter's easy acceptance of this man who had come into their lives so suddenly. We don't have much, but you're welcome to share it. Lunch was a simple affair: leftover cornbread, some beans, and the last of the venison jerky Sheriff Blackwood's wife had given them. But the children's chatter and Colton's quiet presence made it feel like a feast to Beatrice. Mr. Chase was a marshal, Oliver informed his sister importantly as they ate. That's like a sheriff, only bigger. Colton smiled at the boy's description. That's one way to put it. Did you catch lots of bad guys? Olivia wanted to know. Some, he admitted. But mostly I tried to keep people from becoming bad guys in the first place. Sometimes all it takes is someone willing to listen, to help before things get too desperate. Like you helped us, Beatrice said softly. His eyes met hers across the table. What I did for you and the children was nothing special, Beatrice. Any decent man would have done the same. But they didn't, she pointed out. You did. A flush crept up his neck and he looked down at his plate. Just happened to be passing by at the right time. After lunch, while the children returned to the corral to play with Sonny, Colton helped Beatrice wash the few dishes. You're good with them, she observed. The children, I mean, have you ever thought of having a family of your own? The question was forward, perhaps too much so, but Beatrice found she wanted to know, needed to know for reasons she wasn't quite ready to examine. Colton was quiet for a long moment, his hands stilling in the dishwater. Once, he finally said. A long time ago, but it didn't work out. I'm sorry, she said, genuinely regretful that she had touched on what was clearly a painful memory. He shrugged, resuming his task. It was for the best. The woman I was engaged to, Caroline, she deserved better than worrying whether her husband would come home each night. She married a banker instead, has 3 children now, I hear. Do you regret it? Beatrice asked, then immediately wished she could take back the intrusive question. I'm sorry, that's none of my business. No, it's all right. He handed her the last plate to dry. I used to regret it. Used to wonder what might have been. But now, he glanced out the window at Oliver and Olivia. Now I think she made the right choice. Children need stability. They need to know their father will be there tomorrow and the day after that. And you couldn't promise that, Beatrice surmised. Not then, not with the badge. He dried his hands on a towel, and after. Well, after what happened with my men, I couldn't promise anyone anything, not even myself. Beatrice wanted to ask what had happened, what tragedy had sent this good man down a path of solitude. But she sensed he had shared as much as he was ready to for one day. Thank you for the lesson today, she said instead. I feel stronger somehow, more capable. You were always capable, Beatrice. You just needed the tools to show it. He reached for his hat. I should go. Sheriff Blackwood asked me to help him with some paperwork this afternoon. Judge arrives day after tomorrow. Of course. She walked him to the door. Will you come back tomorrow? The children would like it. Just the children, a voice inside her asked. Be honest with yourself, Beatrice. I'd like it too, she amended softly, something warmed in his eyes. Then I'll be here. Maybe we can work on your aim some more. After he left, Beatrice stood in the doorway, watching him walk toward town. There was something about the way he moved, confident but not arrogant, alert but not fearful, that spoke of a man comfortable in his own skin despite the burdens he carried. It was an attractive quality, she realized. More attractive than she was prepared to admit, even to herself. Richard had been dead only 6 months. It was too soon to be thinking of another man in such terms, too soon to be noticing the breadth of shoulders or the gentle strength of hands. Too soon to be wondering what it might be like to be held in those arms, to be protected and cherished by someone who understood loss as she did. Far too soon. And yet, as she turned back to her small house and the tasks that awaited her, Beatrice found herself looking forward to tomorrow with an anticipation that had nothing to do with shooting lessons and everything to do with the man who would be teaching them. Growing closer, the next 2 days fell into a pattern that felt almost like normalcy to Beatrice. Mornings were spent tending to the house and helping the children care for Sonny. Afternoons brought Colton, with his patient instruction and quiet strength, teaching Beatrice to handle the Derringer with increasing confidence. But it wasn't just shooting lessons that he brought. There were other gifts, practical ones: a bolt for the door that Oliver helped him install, a proper halter for Sonny, a set of simple wooden blocks he had carved himself for the children to play with. You didn't have to do all this, Beatrice protested when he presented the blocks. Colton shrugged, watching Oliver and Olivia exclaim over the gift. I like working with my hands, gives me something to do in the evenings. Instead of what? Drinking at the saloon like most of the men in town, she teased. A smile touched his lips. Never much cared for drinking. Man needs to keep his wits about him. On the evening before the judge's arrival, Colton stayed for supper again. The meal was better this time. Beatrice had found work doing laundry for some of the town's more prosperous citizens, and the pay had allowed her to purchase fresh supplies. After the children were tucked into bed, Beatrice and Colton sat by the fire, a comfortable silence between them. It was a cool night for late spring, and the warmth of the flames was welcome. Are you nervous about tomorrow? Beatrice asked finally. Colton shook his head. Just glad to see justice done. Those men won't be terrorizing anyone else for a long while. Because of you. She met his eyes across the dim room. You could have ridden on, Colton. No one would have blamed you for not getting involved. I would have blamed myself. His voice was quiet but firm. Some things a man can't ride away from. And after, she asked, the question that had been hovering unspoken between them finally finding voice. After the trial, will you ride away then? Colton was silent for a long moment, his eyes on the dancing flames. I don't know, he admitted finally. I've been thinking about it. Sheriff Blackwood offered me a deputy position, said the town could use a man with my experience. Hope flared in Beatrice's chest, bright and sudden. And will you take it? I haven't decided. He looked at her then, his expression unreadable in the firelight. What do you think I should do? The question caught her off guard. That he would value her opinion on something so personal, so important to his future, touched her deeply. "I think," she said carefully, "that you should do what brings you peace. If that's continuing to move from place to place, then that's what you should do. But if it's staying in one place, putting down roots." She hesitated, then added softly, "There are worse places than redemption." "And worse company than present company," he murmured, his eyes never leaving hers. The moment stretched between them, charged with unspoken possibilities. Beatrice felt her heart quicken, her breath catching in her throat. If he moved toward her now, would she step back? Did she want him to move toward her? The answer, she realized with a mixture of surprise and certainty, was yes. Yes, she wanted this man to cross the small space between them. Yes, she wanted to feel his arms around her, his lips on hers. Yes, despite the guilt and grief and uncertainty, she wanted Colton Chase in a way she hadn't wanted anything in a very long time. But he didn't move. Instead, he broke the gaze, looking back to the fire. "It's getting late. I should go. Big day tomorrow, of course." Beatrice stood, smoothing her skirts, hoping he couldn't see the flush she felt heating her cheeks. "What time is the trial?" 10 o'clock. He rose as well, reaching for his hat. "I'll come by after, let you know how it went." At the door he paused, turning back to her. "Beatrice?" "Yes." His hand came up, hesitating a moment before gently brushing a strand of hair from her face. "Thank you." "For what?" "For making me consider staying." His fingers lingered a moment against her cheek, then fell away. "Good night." After he left, Beatrice pressed her hand to the spot his fingers had touched, her skin still tingling from the brief contact. It had been so long since a man had touched her with such tenderness, such reverence. She should feel guilty, she thought. Guilty for the way her heart had leapt at his touch, for the way she had wished for more. Richard had been a good husband, a good father. She had loved him deeply, genuinely, but Richard was gone, and she was still here, still alive, still capable of feeling, of wanting, of needing. Was it disloyal to his memory to acknowledge that? To admit that, in just a few days, Colton Chase had awakened something in her that she had thought died with her husband. As she banked the fire for the night, Beatrice came to a decision. Tomorrow, after the trial, after Colton had fulfilled his obligation to justice, she would tell him. Tell him that she hoped he would stay in redemption, not just for the town's sake or even for her children's, though they had clearly grown attached to him, but for her sake. Because in the midst of loss and upheaval and fear, he had given her something precious, hope for a future she could barely allow herself to imagine. A future that, perhaps, they might build together. Justice, the courthouse in redemption, was nothing more than the town hall repurposed for the occasion of Judge Harlan Parker's monthly circuit through the territory. Simple wooden benches had been arranged in rows, a table set up at the front for the judge, and a smaller one for the prisoners. Colton arrived early, wanting to speak with Sheriff Blackwood before the proceedings began. He found the lawman in his office, reviewing his notes. "Morning, Chase," Blackwood greeted him. "Ready for this, as I'll ever be." Colton accepted the cup of coffee the sheriff offered. "How long do you think it will take with Judge Parker?" "Not long. He's not one for drawn-out proceedings." Blackwood sipped his own coffee. "The evidence is clear-cut. Your testimony, mine, the children's statements that I took yesterday. The Barlow gang will be heading to territorial prison before sundown." Colton nodded, satisfied. Justice in the territories was often swift, sometimes too swift. But in this case, there was no doubt of the Barlows' guilt. "Have you given any more thought to my offer?" Blackwood asked, changing the subject. "Town council approved the deputy position yesterday. Pays not much, but it's steady." "I've been thinking about it," Colton admitted. "It's been a long time since I wore a badge." "Some things you don't forget," the sheriff observed. "Like how to stand between good folks and those who do them harm." Before Colton could respond, the door opened and Deputy Marshal Wilson entered. "They're ready for us," he announced. "Judge Parker just arrived." The courtroom was already half full when they entered, curious townspeople having come to witness justice being served. Colton took his seat near the front, his back straight, his expression neutral. A door at the side opened, and the Barlow gang was led in, hands and feet shackled. Elias Barlow's cold eyes found Colton immediately, his gaze filled with hate. Colton met it steadily. showing nothing of the anger he still felt when he thought of the terror these men had inflicted on Beatrice and her children. Judge Parker entered next, a tall, austere man with a shock of white hair and piercing blue eyes. He took his place at the table, surveying the room with a practiced glance. "Court is now in session," he declared, his voice carrying easily through the room. Case of the Territory versus Elias Barlow, Micah Barlow, Peter Duggan, Samuel Chalmers, and Seth Chalmers. Charges are kidnapping, destruction of property, theft, and assault. How do the defendants plead? "Not guilty, Your Honor," Elias Barlow called out before his court-appointed lawyer could speak. "We was just collecting on a debt owed us by Richard Ravenwood." "That's so." Judge Parker's eyebrows rose. "And you have documentation of this debt, I presume?" "It was a verbal agreement," Barlow insisted, "but a binding one. We lent him money for seed last year, and he never paid us back. And when Mr. Ravenwood died of consumption 6 months ago, you decided to collect this alleged debt by terrorizing his widow and kidnapping his children." The judge's tone made it clear what he thought of this defense. "We was just holding the kids until she paid up," Micah Barlow interjected. "We wasn't gonna hurt them." "Silence," Judge Parker ordered. "You'll speak when called upon, not before." He shuffled the papers before him. "I have here statements from Sheriff Blackwood, Deputy Marshal Wilson, and Mr. Colton Chase regarding the condition in which the Ravenwood homestead was found, as well as the circumstances of the children's rescue. I also have statements from the children themselves." The trial proceeded swiftly after that. Colton was called to testify, recounting the events of that day, finding Beatrice in the dust outside her devastated home, her desperate plea for help, the pursuit and confrontation with the Barlow gang. "And in your opinion, Mr. Chase," Judge Parker asked, "was there any indication that the Barlows truly intended to return the children once their mother paid this alleged debt?" Colton's eyes found Elias Barlow's. "No, Your Honor." Based on statements made by Elias Barlow at the time of confrontation, it appears they intended to sell the children, the boy to the mines, the girl to other establishments. A murmur of outrage rippled through the courtroom. Judge Parker rapped his gavel once, restoring order. "That's a lie." Elias Barlow shouted, "We was just scaring them. We wouldn't have actually done it, you said, and I quote, 'Boy looks strong enough to work the mines down south. Girl might fetch a good price in certain establishments once she's a bit older," Colton stated flatly. "Sheriff Blackwood and Deputy Marshal Wilson both heard you say it." The two lawmen nodded in confirmation. Judge Parker's expression was grave as he considered the evidence before him. After hearing testimony from Sheriff Blackwood and Deputy Marshal Wilson that corroborated Colton's account, he called a brief recess to consider his verdict. When court reconvened 30 minutes later, the judge's decision was swift and uncompromising. "Elias Barlow, Micah Barlow, Peter Duggan, Samuel Chalmers, and Seth Chalmers, this court finds you guilty on all charges." Judge Parker's voice was stern, unyielding. "For the crimes of kidnapping, destruction of property, theft, and assault, I sentence you each to 15 years hard labor in the territorial prison." Relief washed over Colton as the sentence was pronounced. Justice had been served. Beatrice and her children could rest easy knowing that the men who had terrorized them would be locked away for a very long time. As the prisoners were let out, Elias Barlow paused beside Colton. "This ain't over, Chase," he hissed. "I got a long memory, and 15 years ain't forever." "But it's long enough," Colton replied evenly. "Long enough for the Ravenwood children to grow up safe from the likes of you." After the courtroom had emptied, Sheriff Blackwood approached Colton. "Well, that's that. The marshal's men will transport them to the territorial prison tomorrow." He studied Colton's face. "You did good work, Chase. The kind of work a deputy would do." Colton nodded slowly. "I've been thinking about your offer, Sheriff, and I'm inclined to accept it." Blackwood's eyebrows rose in surprise. "What changed your mind?" "You seemed set on moving on just a few days ago." "Let's just say I found a reason to stay," Colton replied, thinking of green eyes and a quiet strength that had touched something long dormant within him. "Would that reason happen to be a widow with 2 young uns?" Blackwood asked shrewdly. Colton didn't answer directly. "The position comes with lodging, you said, Small cabin behind the jail, nothing fancy but it's sound. Stove works, roof doesn't leak. The sheriff grinned. Course, a man with a growing family might eventually want something bigger. Let's not get ahead of ourselves, Colton cautioned, though the thought of a real home with Beatrice and the children, sent an unexpected warmth through him. I haven't even told her I'm staying yet. Well, what are you waiting for? Blackwood clapped him on the shoulder. Go on. I've got paperwork to do for the new deputy anyway. As Colton left the courthouse, his steps lighter than they had been in years, he found himself thinking of the path that had led him to this moment. A chance encounter on the trail, a woman's plea for help. Two children who had somehow worked their way into his heart in the space of days, and Beatrice. Beatrice with her quiet dignity and fierce love for her children. Beatrice who had lost everything and still found the strength to rebuild. Beatrice who looked at him not as the hard man he had become, but as the good man he had once been. The man he might be again with her beside him. He quickened his pace, eager now to share the news both of the Barlow's sentence and of his decision to stay in redemption. To stay with her if she would have him. The future stretched before him, no longer an empty road leading nowhere but a path with purpose, with meaning, with hope. New beginnings. Beatrice was hanging laundry in the yard when she saw Colton approaching. The children were at school, a luxury she had insisted upon despite their protests that they wanted to stay home and hear about the trial. Education comes first, she had told them firmly. Mr. Chase will still be here when you get home. She hadn't been certain of that, not really. Part of her had feared that once the trial was over, once justice had been served, Colton would feel his obligation to them was complete. That he would tip his hat, bid them farewell, and ride out just as he had ridden in alone, unattached. But here he was, walking toward her with purpose in his stride, his expression unreadable at this distance, but his eyes, she knew, would be that clear blue that reminded her of Montana skies in autumn. How did it go? She called as he neared, unable to wait for him to reach her. 15 years, he replied, each of them, hard labor. Relief washed over her. Then it's over, truly over. It is. He reached her then, removing his hat. The children are at school, she nodded. I thought it best to maintain some normalcy, they've missed so much already. You're a good mother, Beatrice, he said simply. The compliment warmed her. I try to be, it's not always easy doing it alone. Something shifted in his expression then, a softening around the eyes, a slight curve of the lips. About that I've been thinking, her heart quickened. Oh. Sheriff Blackwood offered me a position as his deputy. I've decided to accept it. Joy bloomed within her, so sudden and fierce that it took her breath away. You're staying in redemption. I am. His eyes held her steadily. If that's all right with you, all right with me. Beatrice laughed, a sound of pure happiness. Colton, the children will be overjoyed. They've grown so attached to you already. And their mother, he asked quietly. How does she feel about me staying? The directness of the question caught her off guard. This was the moment she realized. The moment to be honest with him and with herself. Their mother, she said carefully, has come to care for you a great deal, more than she thought possible in such a short time, more than she has allowed herself to feel for anyone since her husband died. He took a step closer, close enough that she could see the flecks of darker blue in his eyes, the tiny scar at the corner of his right eye. Beatrice. Yes, I'm not a wealthy man. I don't have land or money or fine things to offer. What I have is a strong back, willing hands, and a heart that hasn't felt much of anything in years until I found you crying in the dust outside your home. His voice was low, earnest. I don't know if I'm worthy of the feelings you just described, but I'd like the chance to try to be. Tears pricked at Beatrice's eyes, not tears of sorrow this time, but of a joy so intense it was almost painful. Colton Chase, are you courting me? A smile tugged at his lips. Trying to, not doing a very good job of it, I reckon. On the contrary, she whispered, I think you're doing just fine. His hand came up then, cupping her cheek with a gentleness that belied the strength she knew it possessed. May I kiss you, Beatrice Ravenwood? In answer, she leaned into his touch, her eyes closing as his lips found hers. The kiss was tender, questioning at first, then deepening as she responded. His arms slipped around her waist, drawing her closer, and Beatrice allowed herself to be enfolded in his embrace, feeling for the first time in months, perhaps years, truly safe. When they finally parted, both slightly breathless, Colton rested his forehead against hers. "I've wanted to do that since the first time I saw you smile," he admitted. "Even covered in dust and tear-stained, you were the most beautiful woman I'd ever seen." "I was a mess," she laughed softly. "You were magnificent," he corrected. A mother fighting for her children with every ounce of strength she had. How could I not admire that? How could I not fall a little in love right then and there? Love. The word hung between them, fragile and profound. "Too soon to say it?" he asked, uncertainty creeping into his voice. "I know it's only been a few days. I know your husband hasn't been gone long. If you need time," Beatrice silenced him with another kiss, this one briefer but no less heartfelt. "Life is too short and too unpredictable to waste time when you're certain of something," she said when they parted. "I've lost too much already to risk losing more by being afraid to reach for happiness when it's offered." Relief and joy mingled in his expression. "Then you'll allow me to court you properly, to show you and the children what kind of man I can be, what kind of life we might build together." "Yes," she said simply. "Yes to all of it, Colton." They stood together in the yard, the laundry forgotten on the line, the future stretching before them like the vast Montana sky wide open, full of possibility, and theirs for the taking. "The children will be home soon," Beatrice said finally, reluctantly stepping back from his embrace. "What shall we tell them?" Colton considered this. "The truth, I think, that I'm staying in redemption as the new deputy. That I care deeply for their mother and hope in time to earn a place in their family. But that nothing will happen too quickly, and they have a say in this too." His thoughtfulness regarding the children only confirmed what Beatrice already knew, that this man, who had ridden to their rescue like a hero from a storybook, was in reality something far better. A good man with a kind heart, who would consider her children's feelings as carefully as he considered her own. "They already adore you," she assured him. "Especially Oliver. He needs a man in his life, someone to show him how to be the kind of man his father would have wanted him to be." "I'd be honored to try," Colton said sincerely, "though I could never replace Richard in their hearts." "Nor would I want to. No one could replace him," Beatrice agreed. "But there's room in their hearts, in all our hearts, for new love alongside the memory of the old." The afternoon passed in a sweet haze of conversation and shared hopes. When the children returned from school, bursting with questions about the trial and excitement about Sonny's progress, Beatrice and Colton sat them down to share the news. "Mr. Chase has something to tell you," Beatrice began, her eyes meeting Colton's across the small table. "I've decided to stay in redemption," he told them. "Sheriff Blackwood has asked me to be his deputy." "You're going to be a lawman again." Oliver's eyes widened with admiration. "With a badge and everything?" Colton nodded, smiling at the boy's enthusiasm. "With a badge and everything." "Will you still come see us?" Olivia asked, her small face serious. "And help with Sonny?" "I hope to do more than that, Olivia," Colton said gently. "If it's all right with you and your brother, I'd like to spend a lot of time with your family. You see, I've come to care very much for your mother and for both of you." The twins exchanged one of their silent communications, a look passing between them that spoke volumes. "Do you love Mama?" Oliver asked bluntly. Colton's eyes found Beatrice's, warm with affection. "I do, very much." "Are you going to marry her?" Olivia's question was equally direct. "Olivia," Beatrice felt heat rising to her cheeks. It's a fair question," Colton interrupted gently. He turned back to the children. "I hope that someday, if your mother will have me and if you both approve, I might be fortunate enough to marry her. But that's something that would happen only when we're all ready. When we've had time to get to know each other better, to be sure that's what we all want." "I'd like it," Oliver declared after a moment's consideration. "You make Mama smile. She didn't smile much after Papa died. And you're teaching her to be brave," Olivia added. "And you brought us Sonny, and you saved us from those bad men. So you wouldn't mind if I came around more often?" Colton asked, his expression serious despite the lightness in his eyes. "If I took your mother out for drives or picnics sometimes, could we come too?" Oliver wanted to know. "On the picnics, I mean." "Sometimes," Beatrice interjected, feeling it was time she had some say in this conversation. "But sometimes Mr. Chase and I might want to spend time together, just the two of us. Would that be all right?" The children nodded, apparently satisfied with this arrangement. Then it's settled, Colton said, reaching across the table to take Beatrice's hand. I'll begin my duties as deputy tomorrow, and my courtship of your mother officially begins today. With your permission, of course, he added with a wink to the twins. Permission granted, Oliver said solemnly, making them all laugh. Later, after supper had been eaten and the children were in bed, Beatrice and Colton stood together on the small porch of the rented house, looking up at the stars that blanketed the Montana night sky. Are you sure about this? She asked softly. About us. It won't be easy, you know. The children and I, we come with complications, with history. So do I, he reminded her. But maybe that's what makes this right. We understand each other's scars because we have our own. His arms slipped around her waist, drawing her against his side. I've been running for years, Beatrice. From my past, from attachment, from the possibility of loss. But when I saw you that day, something inside me said, this is it. This is where you stop running. She leaned her head against his shoulder, fitting there as if the space had been designed for her. I thought my heart died with Richard, she confessed. I loved him so much, and watching him slip away day by day, I didn't think I had the capacity to love like that again. And now, he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Beatrice turned in his arms, looking up at him in the silver light of the moon. Now I think perhaps the heart is more resilient than I gave it credit for, more generous, more capable of expansion than I ever imagined. His kiss was gentle, a promise rather than a demand. A beginning rather than an ending. When they parted, Colton glanced toward the door. I should go, it's getting late, and I need to report to Sheriff Blackwood early tomorrow. Deputy Chase, Beatrice smiled, liking the sound of it. It suits you, does it? He looked thoughtful. I hope so. I hope I can be the kind of lawman this town needs, the kind of man you and the children deserve. You already are, she assured him, rising on tiptoe to place one last kiss on his cheek. Good night, Colton. Good night, Beatrice, he replied, his eyes lingering on her face as if memorizing every detail. I'll see you tomorrow. As she watched him walk away, his tall figure gradually disappearing into the darkness, Beatrice felt a peace settle over her that had been absent for far too long. The future, which had seemed so bleak and uncertain just days ago, now stretched before her, filled with promise. Not without challenges, certainly. Not without the memory of loss and the knowledge that life offered no guarantees, but with hope, with possibility, with love. And for tonight, that was enough. Epilogue. 1 year later, the September sun cast golden light across the rolling hills of the Ravenwood Ranch, painting the newly harvested fields in hues of amber and bronze. From her vantage point on the porch of the ranch house, their house now, rebuilt on the foundation of the old but expanded, improved, Beatrice watched as Colton taught Oliver to rope a practice dummy they had set up in the yard. That's it, son. Colton encouraged as the boy's loop settled neatly over the wooden target. Now pull it tight, just like I showed you. Pride swelled in Beatrice's heart as she observed the pair. In the year since Colton had entered their lives, Oliver had blossomed under his guidance, growing from a solemn, too serious child into a boy who laughed readily and approached life with confidence. Olivia, too, had flourished. Currently, she was in the corral with Sonny, who had grown from a spindly foal into a handsome yearling. The bond between girl and horse was beautiful to witness, a testament to the healing power of love and care. Mama, look, Olivia called, noticing Beatrice on the porch. Sonny can bow now. I taught him. Sure enough, the Palomino dropped his front leg and lowered his head in a reasonable approximation of a bow. Beatrice applauded, laughing at her daughter's delight. Very impressive, darling. You've worked so hard with him. Colton looked up at the sound of her voice, his face breaking into the warm smile that still, after all these months, made her heart skip a beat. He said something to Oliver, then made his way to the porch, taking the steps 2 at a time. Mrs. Chase, he greeted her, his eyes twinkling. You're supposed to be resting. I've rested enough, she protested mildly. Besides, the baby is sleeping, and I wanted to see what you and the children were up to. At the mention of the baby, Colton's expression softened further. He sat beside her on the porch swing, his arm automatically going around her shoulders. Nathan is all right. He took his bottle, every drop, Beatrice assured him, leaning into his embrace. He's growing stronger every day. Their son, Nathan Colton Chase, had arrived 3 months earlier, a healthy, robust boy with his father's dark hair and his mother's green eyes. His birth had completed their family in a way that none of them had fully anticipated. Oliver and Olivia had taken to their half-brother with immediate devotion, vying for the privilege of helping with his care. "I still can't believe it sometimes," Colton admitted, his gaze taking in the ranch, the children, and finally coming to rest on Beatrice with a tenderness that never failed to move her. "That all of this is real, that it's ours." "Believe it," she said softly, reaching up to touch his cheek. "You made it happen, Colton. You gave us back our land, our home. You gave us a future." After serving as Redemption's deputy for 6 months, Colton had surprised Beatrice with the news that he had purchased the Ravenwood homestead from the bank. The original house had been beyond repair, but with the help of neighbors and friends from town, they had built a new one larger, sturdier, a true family home. Colton still served as deputy 3 days a week, but he had also taken on farming duties, turning the land into a place of productivity that sustained their growing family. Working side by side, Beatrice and Colton had forged not just a partnership in love, but in life. Their days were filled with laughter, hard work, and a growing sense of community. Beatrice looked forward to each morning, no longer burdened by grief but buoyed by love and the promise of their shared future. As the sun dipped lower in the sky, Beatrice felt a surge of gratitude for the journey that had brought them to this moment. The pain of the past had not vanished, but it had been transformed into something beautiful. Hope had taken root, blossoming into a life full of love, laughter, and a new beginning.